Case 1. Donald Harvey, 37, confirmed patient deaths. A career spanning 17 years. A confession that ran 15 hours and filled hundreds of pages of court transcript. Donald Harvey is, by any documented measure, the most prolific perpetrator of patient harm in Ohio's recorded history, and the case broke open because of a single routine autopsy. Donald Harvey was born in April of 1952 near Cincinnati and raised in Boonville, Kentucky. By the early 1970s, he was working in Ohio healthcare as a nurse's aide, an orderly, and an autopsy assistant. He held positions at 3 facilities over the following 17 years: Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky, the Cincinnati Veterans Administration Medical Center, and Daniel Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. At every one of those facilities, patient death rates on his assigned wards drew no formal investigation during his tenure. The case entered the criminal justice system through the Hamilton County Coroner's Office. On March 7, 1987, a 44-year-old patient named John Powell died at Drake Memorial Hospital. Powell had been admitted following a vehicle collision and was on life support. During his autopsy, the forensic pathologist detected chemical markers consistent with cyanide poisoning. The coroner's office immediately notified Cincinnati police. That single toxicology finding was the beginning of what would become one of the most extensively documented serial patient harm prosecutions in American legal history. At the time of Powell's autopsy, investigators had one potential homicide. What transformed that into a 37-count prosecution was a convergence of investigative sources. ZPO television anchor Pat Menarson began a months-long independent review of Drake Memorial's patient death records, cross-referencing shift assignments and timing. His findings corroborated what several former co-workers had quietly noted for years, that patients on certain wards at Drake had been dying at rates inconsistent with their documented medical conditions. Harvey's court-appointed defense attorney, Bill Whalen, confronted his client with the mounting evidence. Harvey confessed. Over approximately 15 hours of recorded interviews, he described in detail his methods and the facilities where he had worked. He admitted to introducing cyanide or arsenic into patients' gastric feeding tubes near the end of his shifts at Drake. He admitted to interfering with oxygen supply equipment at the Cincinnati VA Medical Center. He admitted that some victims had not been patients at all, that he had administered arsenic to individuals in his personal life, including a neighbor, the father of a former partner, and at least one other person known to him. The forensic investigation that followed Harvey's confession involved toxicological testing of multiple remains, including exhumations ordered by Hamilton County prosecutors. Testing confirmed the presence of arsenic and cyanide at levels consistent with Harvey's detailed accounts. The consistency between Harvey's confessions and the toxicological findings provided the evidentiary foundation for the prosecution. It is important to understand the institutional context that allowed Harvey's conduct to continue as long as it did. In 1985, security personnel at the Cincinnati VA Medical Center discovered a loaded firearm, hospital supplies, and occult literature in Harvey's gym bag during a search. Because the search lacked the legal foundation required to support disciplinary action, the VA was unable to terminate him on that basis. He was permitted to resign and immediately obtained employment at Drake Memorial Hospital. With no flag, no background check mechanism capable of surfacing his prior conduct, and no communication between the two employers. The absence of a centralized nurse aid registry in Ohio in 1985 was not an oversight. It simply did not exist. The Harvey case, along with a growing body of similar cases nationally, became one of the driving forces behind the Federal Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1987, which required states to establish nurse aid registries. Ohio's Nurse Aid Registry, maintained by the Ohio Department of Health, became operational in 1992. According to the registry's own records, more than 1,928 individuals have since been identified and placed on the registry's abuse, neglect, and misappropriation list, making them ineligible to provide care in Ohio nursing homes. Harvey was arrested in April of 1987. The Hamilton County Grand Jury returned indictments on multiple counts of aggravated murder. To avoid the death penalty, Harvey entered into a negotiated plea agreement. On August 11, 1987, in Hamilton County Common Pleas Court, he pleaded guilty to 24 counts of aggravated murder. He received 3 consecutive life sentences. Hamilton County Assistant Prosecutor Joseph Dieters, who later became a justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, described the case publicly as unlike anything the office had previously handled. Additional pleas were entered in Laurel County, Kentucky, for homicides at Marymount Hospital. Combined, Harvey pleaded guilty to 37 counts of murder across both states. Privately, he claimed responsibility for a figure he described as closer to 87 total victims. That higher figure was never formally prosecuted. The 37 guilty pleas represent the judicially confirmed record. Harvey served his sentence at the Toledo Correctional Institution. On March 28, 2017, he was attacked by another inmate inside a protective custody unit. He died from the resulting injuries on March 30, 2017. He was 64 years old. The policy legacy of the Harvey case extends well beyond the nurse aid registry. Pharmacy access controls were rewritten at Drake and at the Cincinnati VA. The Hamilton County Coroner's Office adopted routine toxicology screening protocols for suspicious in-hospital deaths. Cross-referencing of staff assignments against patient mortality data became a recognized standard for internal quality assurance reviews in Ohio's long-term care sector. And the case is cited to this day in Ohio Attorney General training materials on healthcare fraud investigation as the foundational example of how a single forensic finding, one toxicology report from one autopsy, can unravel years of undetected patient harm. If you are watching this for the first time, pause right here and subscribe to Hidden Case Diaries. Every case on this channel is sourced from public court records, coroner's reports, and verified news archives. Now let us keep moving. Case 2, Michael Swongo. A note at the start of this case. Michael Swongo was a medical intern, not a licensed nurse. He is included in this episode because the evidence that ultimately drove his prosecution came primarily from the observations of nursing staff at the Ohio State University Medical Center. And because his case changed how Ohio hospitals respond when nurses report concerns about a clinician. Michael Swongo entered the Ohio State University Medical Center's surgical internship program in 1983. He had graduated from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine and had a documented history of academic irregularities that the OSU admissions process did not surface. He was assigned primarily to Rhodes Hall. Within weeks of his arrival, registered nurses on his floor began documenting a pattern. Patients who had been clinically stable experienced acute deteriorations in the period immediately following Swongo's room visits. One nurse directly observed Swongo administering what appeared to be an unauthorized injection to a patient who became acutely ill shortly afterward. That nurse filed a report with hospital administration. Other nurses filed additional reports. The accumulation of nursing concerns was sufficient by any reasonable standard to warrant a referral to law enforcement. OSU's administration reviewed the reports internally and concluded the evidence was insufficient to pursue disciplinary action and made a decision that a later independent review would describe as far too superficial. Rather than involve outside investigators or law enforcement, the hospital declined to renew Swongo's residency offer at the end of his internship year in June of 1984 and allowed him to leave without a report to any external authority. The cost of that institutional decision would not become fully apparent for years. Investigators working the case after Swongo's eventual arrest identified at least 6 OSU patients whose deaths between 1983 and 1984 were considered suspicious and potentially connected to Swongo's conduct. Among them was Cynthia Ann McGee, a 19-year-old gymnast at the University of Illinois who had been admitted to OSU after a vehicle collision. She died on January 14, 1984. Swongo was the assigned intern on her case. After leaving OSU, Swongo returned to Quincy, Illinois and secured work as a paramedic, a position for which he was not lawfully qualified, having failed the required certification examination. In October of 1984, several of Swongo's ambulance colleagues became ill following shifts they had shared with him. Illinois police obtained a search warrant and searched his apartment. Inside, investigators found handwritten recipes for ricin and cyanide, as well as a bottle of ant poison containing arsenic. They also found a personal journal containing entries that expressed interest in poisoning. Swongo was prosecuted and convicted in 1985 of aggravated battery for the non-lethal poisoning of his ambulance co-workers. He was sentenced to 5 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Following his release in 1987, Swongo obtained clinical employment at multiple facilities across multiple states using forged credentials and false identifiers. He worked at institutions in South Dakota and New York, and at a medical mission hospital in Manine, Zimbabwe. At each facility, patients and colleagues reported concerns that were not adequately transmitted to subsequent employers or licensing boards. The cross-state portability of his credentials and the absence of a unified national reporting mechanism for physician misconduct made his continued employment possible. The federal investigation was built by Special Agent Bruce Sackman of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General's Office, who spent years reconstructing Swango's employment history and accumulating evidence of patient deaths at the Northport VA Medical Center on Long Island, New York. 3 Northport patients died in circumstances consistent with intentional injection of potassium chloride during the period of Swango's employment there. In 2000, federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York obtained Swango's guilty plea on 3 federal murder charges. He received a federal sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On October 18, 2000, in Franklin County Common Pleas Court in Columbus, Swango entered a separate guilty plea before Judge Lisa Sadler, admitting to the aggravated murder of Cynthia McGee. He admitted in court that he had administered a fatal dose of potassium to her. Judge Sadler imposed a life sentence with the possibility of parole only after 20 years, a term ordered to run consecutively to the federal sentence, which rendered it functionally academic. The institutional review that followed at OSU was conducted by the dean of the law school, James E. Meeks, and produced findings that became a model for how academic medical centers should respond to nursing concerns about clinicians. The Meeks report concluded that the hospital's internal inquiry had been inadequate, that nursing reports deserved greater institutional weight, and that any pattern of patient deterioration following a specific clinician's room visits warranted immediate referral to law enforcement. OSU publicly acknowledged that it should have brought in outside investigators at the time the nursing concerns were filed in 1983 and 1984. The National Practitioner Data Bank, expanded following the Swango case to include physician-related adverse actions, is a direct regulatory descendant of the gap his case exposed. Cross-state reference verification requirements for physician credentialing, now mandatory at accredited United States hospitals, are also traceable, in part, to the institutional failures that allowed Swango to move from Ohio to Illinois to New York to Africa and back, leaving documented concerns in each location that were never connected. Swango is currently incarcerated at the ADX Florence Federal Facility in Florence, Colorado. He has never publicly disputed his guilty plea in the Cynthia McGee case. Case 3, Molly Parsons. This case involves the death of a child patient. Our editorial standards require that we state only the child's age, the outcome, and the investigative and legal process. We do not describe medical conditions, physical details, or circumstances beyond what is necessary to document the investigation. Molly Parsons was a licensed home health care nurse based in Middletown, Ohio. From at least 2009 through March of 2011, she was contracted through a home health agency to provide private duty nursing care to a 14-year-old patient in the Dayton area. The patient was covered by Ohio Medicaid for private duty nursing services. Parsons was assigned to work a 6-day-a-week schedule, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., at the patient's home. On March 1, 2011, the 14-year-old patient died. The lead investigator on the case was Dayton Police Detective Rebecca Rose. Detective Rose's investigation relied on 3 primary evidentiary sources. Parsons' own daily nursing notes, which Parsons had submitted to the contracting home health agency as documentation of services rendered. Records obtained from the Medicaid billing system documenting the services for which Parsons had billed and been paid, and physical and testimonial evidence gathered from the patient's home. The nursing notes became the central forensic document in the case. According to Detective Rose's court testimony, Parsons had submitted daily notes throughout her period of assignment, describing herself as present during her assigned hours and recording clinical observations about the patient, including feeding activities and health status. Investigators compared those documented observations against other available records and found them inconsistent. Parsons' note for the day of the patient's death recorded that the patient had been fed and was in good health at 10 p.m., approximately 2 minutes before the patient's mother placed a 911 emergency call. The investigation identified a pattern of absences from the assigned residence across multiple days during Parsons' period of employment. Despite those absences, Parsons had billed Ohio Medicaid for the full hours as though the services had been provided. 5 individuals were ultimately prosecuted in connection with the case. Parsons, the patient's mother, the supervising nurse responsible for clinical oversight of Parsons' work, a Department of Job and Family Services surrogate responsible for monitoring the Medicaid eligibility and services plan, and the patient's treating physician. The breadth of the prosecution reflected the investigators' conclusion that the failure was not attributable to any single person's conduct, but to a compounding of unmet responsibilities at multiple levels of the care structure. In 2012, Parsons pleaded guilty in Montgomery County Common Pleas Court to involuntary manslaughter and additional counts related to the case. Montgomery County Common Pleas Judge Mary Catherine Huffman sentenced Parsons to 10 years in prison, the maximum available under the pleaded charges. In open court, Judge Huffman stated that the available sentence was a travesty of justice, reflecting the court's view that the statutory maximum was insufficient relative to the documented harm. Assistant Montgomery County Prosecutor Tracy Ballard Tangeman described the case at sentencing as the most serious involving a child that she or her colleagues had encountered in their careers. Because the state prosecution did not fully address the scope of the Medicaid billing fraud, federal authorities opened a parallel investigation. In 2015, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of Ohio returned an indictment charging Parsons on 4 counts of healthcare fraud. Parsons pleaded guilty in January of 2016 to 2 of those counts. United States District Judge Walter H. Rice sentenced her to 36 months in federal prison, to be served consecutively to her 10-year state sentence, and imposed a lifetime bar against Parsons working for any governmental entity in any healthcare capacity. United States Attorney Benjamin C. Glassman stated in the formal Department of Justice press release that Parsons had directly undermined the purpose for which Medicaid compensated her. The systemic response to the Parsons case was significant. Ohio Medicaid revised its supervisory requirements for private duty home health agencies, increasing the frequency and documentation requirements for supervisory nurse field visits. The Ohio Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit expanded its audit capacity for private duty nursing claims. The case is cited in Ohio Medicaid training materials as the foundational example of the risks created when supervisory oversight fails in a home health care setting. Parsons' Ohio nursing license was permanently revoked by the Ohio Board of Nursing following the state conviction. She remains incarcerated under the terms of her consecutive state and federal sentences. Case 4. The Whetstone Gardens Nurses' 7 defendants, 34 criminal counts, a death attributed to the failure to provide basic wound care, and a series of verdicts that became a national flashpoint in the debate over when negligence ends and criminal conduct begins. Whetstone Gardens and Care Center is a long-term care facility on Olentangy River Road in Columbus, Franklin County, Ohio. In 2017, 2 residents at the facility became the subjects of what would become the Ohio Attorney General's most closely watched long-term care criminal prosecution of the decade. The first resident, James Chandler, was 56 years old. In February of 2017, Chandler developed severe pressure injuries to his sacral area. According to the prosecution's case, Chandler's condition deteriorated over a period of days, without the nursing staff initiating the level of medical response that his documented clinical status required. He was eventually transferred to Riverside Hospital in Columbus. Chandler died on March 5, 2017, from septic shock. The second resident involved in the investigation survived the period at issue but later died of unrelated causes. The Ohio Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit opened the investigation after receiving a complaint from a family member of one of the patients. Investigators subpoenaed Whetstone's nursing notes, treatment records, and electronic medication administration records. They also reviewed surveillance footage from within the facility and cross-referenced those recordings against the shift assignments documented in the facility's staffing records. That cross-referencing process identified entries in multiple patient charts describing care activities that, according to the surveillance record and visitor logs, had not been performed during the times the notes claimed. Several charts contained signatures that investigators identified as forgeries. On February 13, 2019, a Franklin County grand jury returned an indictment naming 7 defendants on a combined 34 counts. The defendants were Sandra Blazer, the Assistant Director of Nursing; Jessica Caldwell, a floor nurse and unit manager; Kimberly Potter, a contracted certified nurse practitioner; Akasua Ayerkwa, a floor nurse; Sheila Daines, a floor nurse; Illumine Muhangre, a floor nurse; and Megan Van Cycle, a floor nurse. 3 defendants, Blazer, Caldwell, and Potter, were charged with involuntary manslaughter, gross patient neglect, and patient neglect in connection with the death of James Chandler. The remaining 4 fatal charges, including forgery and gross patient neglect, related to the falsified records in the second patient's chart. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost announced the indictment on February 14, 2019, and described the case as one concerning the fundamental obligation of institutional caregivers to residents who are entirely dependent on staff for their daily needs. The civil regulatory response was immediate. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services imposed financial penalties on Whetstone Gardens totaling $98,765.45. The courtroom outcomes were unexpected and for many observers instructive. In October of 2021, a Franklin County jury acquitted Jessica Caldwell of all charges following trial. In January of 2022, Franklin County Common Pleas Judge Chris Brown granted a Rule 29 motion for acquittal in favor of Kimberly Potter, a ruling that the court entered because the prosecution's evidentiary record in the judge's assessment had not met the threshold required to send the case to a defense. Potter's attorney, Gregory Peterson, described the prosecution publicly as one that should not have been brought. Potter's records were expunged in April of 2022. Among the remaining defendants, Akosua Ayarkwa pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor tampering with records charge and received a suspended 30-day jail term. Megan Van Sickle pleaded to a misdemeanor and was fined $500 with a suspended 30-day jail term. Ilumine Muhongere pleaded guilty to misdemeanor attempted tampering with records and received a 1-day jail term. The cases of Sandra Blazer and Sheila Daines did not generate widely reported final dispositions in open news sources after early 2022. Blazer had been scheduled for trial in February of 2022. Daines had a pre-trial scheduled for March of that year. Subsequent proceedings were not captured in the major Columbus area news outlets that had tracked the case. The Whetstone prosecutions drew extensive commentary from the Ohio Nurses Association, which argued that bedside nurses were being held individually responsible for systemic understaffing and institutional policy failures that no individual nurse had the authority to correct. The case became a reference point in national nursing advocacy discussions about the appropriate boundary between civil regulatory enforcement, license discipline, facility fines, and civil penalties, and individual criminal prosecution of frontline staff. No owners, operators, or management company executives of Whetstone Gardens or its parent organization were named in any criminal proceeding arising from the Chandler death. Case 5. Aminata, a single procedural error. A 72-year-old man who depended on his airway support to survive. And a question that Ohio courts are still working through. At what point does a nursing mistake become a criminal act? Capri Gardens Nursing and Rehabilitation Center is located in Lewis Center, Delaware County, north of Columbus. The facility had opened 2 years before the events at issue. Aminata Fofana was a licensed practical nurse working the overnight shift. Her patient, Paul Mowry, had been a resident at Capri Gardens since 2019. His wife, Luana Mowry, had been his primary caregiver at home for more than 2 decades before transferring him to Capri Gardens. Mowry had a history of multiple strokes and a prior aneurysm and depended on a tracheostomy for breathing. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on May 20, 2021, near the end of Fofana's overnight shift, she entered Mowry's room. According to Fofana's own statements to federal investigators, she removed Mowry's tracheostomy mask in order to clean it. She did not reattach the tubing before leaving the room. Approximately 1 hour later, the incoming day shift nurse discovered Mowry deceased. The investigation was conducted jointly by the Ohio Department of Health and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Investigators reviewed the facility's central monitoring equipment logs, the alarm records associated with Mowry's airway support equipment, and Fofana's own statements given in the immediate aftermath of the discovery. Mowry's autopsy attributed the cause of death to asphyxiation. The facility's internal review produced a written report submitted to the Ohio Department of Health. That report included a notation that Mowry had the ability to displace the tubing on his own, a characterization that Luana Mowry publicly disputed in statements to media, asserting that her husband had been physically unable to move or adjust his own equipment. The Ohio Department of Health's findings were referred to the Delaware County Prosecutor's Office. A criminal complaint was filed, and Fofana was charged in Delaware County Common Pleas Court with 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, a felony of the 3rd degree under Ohio law. Fofana pleaded guilty in January of 2023. Sentencing took place on February 27, 2023. Delaware County Common Pleas Court sentenced Fofana to 3 years of community control, the term used in Ohio for supervised probation. The terms of her sentence required completion of 100 hours of community service and payment of a $500 fine. The court also imposed a permanent surrender of her nursing license and a lifelong prohibition against paid or volunteer work in any nursing capacity. Fofana offered an apology in open court to Luana Mowry. The Ohio Nurses Association cited the Fofana case in its public commentary on the Whetstone Gardens prosecutions and in submissions to the Ohio legislature on nursing regulatory reform. The association's position, shared by the American Nurses Association nationally in the period following the criminal conviction of Nashville nurse Redonda Vaught in 2022, was that individual criminal prosecution of bedside nurses for medical errors functions as a deterrent to error reporting and distracts from the systemic factors that create conditions in which errors occur. The Delaware County Prosecutor's Office, in response to those arguments, noted that the Ohio involuntary manslaughter statute does not require intentional conduct, only that a death resulted from conduct that constituted a misdemeanor or a minor felony, or from reckless conduct constituting a felony. The determination of whether Fofana's failure to reattach the tracheostomy tubing met that threshold was resolved by the guilty plea, which precluded a full jury or bench adjudication of the question. Fofana's nursing license was permanently surrendered as a condition of the plea. She has not sought reinstatement and is barred from the profession by the terms of her sentence. Case 6, Amber Henderson, a new graduate nurse on the job for 4 months, working a night shift at a Cuyahoga County long-term care facility. An 84-year-old resident who used a wheelchair and could not walk, an unsecured exterior door, and a set of falsified patient check records. The Henderson case arrived in the Ohio criminal justice system in December of 2024 and is still moving through the courts. The Avenue at Warrensville Care and Rehabilitation Center is located in Warrensville Heights, a suburb southeast of Cleveland in Cuyahoga County. At the time of the events at issue, the facility held a 2-star staffing rating from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services on the ProPublica Nursing Home Inspect database. Annual nursing staff turnover at the facility ran at approximately 56%, compared with a statewide average of 58.1% and a national average of 53.9%. According to Care Listings aggregating payroll-based journal data from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Federal regulators had levied 4 financial penalties against the facility in the prior 3 years, the largest of which was approximately $25,847, imposed in April of 2024. Alvera Moody was 84 years old. She was a resident at the Avenue and used a wheelchair. She could not walk independently. On the evening of December 23, 2024, Amber Henderson began her night shift at approximately 9:15 p.m. The outgoing nurse completed a handoff, advising Henderson that Muti had last been checked at 8:40 p.m., was unable to walk, and was in her normal condition. Henderson went to Muti's room at approximately 9:30 p.m. and found it empty. Rather than initiating the facility's missing resident protocol, designated Code Purple, Henderson recorded in the facility's nursing documentation that she had assumed Muti had departed with family members and continued her shift. During the remainder of her shift, the documentation log shows Henderson making no attempt to locate Muti or to alert the facility supervisor. At 12:36 a.m., Henderson made a single call to Muti's family and received no answer. She did not call again and did not escalate to a supervisor. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on December 24th, Henderson informed her supervisor for the first time that she had not made visual contact with Muti during her entire shift. The supervisor initiated a Code Purple. Warrensville Heights police were called. At approximately 8 a.m., Muti was discovered shortly afterward on an exterior patio adjacent to the facility. She was transported by Warrensville Emergency Medical Services to Cleveland Clinic South Point Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. The Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death as environmental exposure with hypothermia. The subsequent police investigation, conducted by the Warrensville Heights Police Department, produced 2 significant evidentiary findings. First, a review of the facility's nursing records showed that Henderson had documented 2-hour patient checks on Muti throughout the shift, records that investigators concluded were false, given that Henderson herself had told officers she had not seen Muti after 9:30 p.m. Second, investigators identified an unsecured door near Muti's room that led to a staircase and to the exterior patio where Muti was found. That door locked from the outside only, meaning that once someone exited through it, the door could not be opened from the exterior side. The investigation indicated the door was not alarmed, and its condition had not been flagged in prior facility inspections. When Warrensville Heights detectives asked Henderson about her training, she reported receiving approximately 30 days of day shift orientation and approximately 2 weeks of night shift orientation, roughly 8 weeks total, before being assigned as the primary nurse on a floor of long-term care residents during overnight hours. Best practice guidelines published by research reviewed in the journal Nurse Education in Practice recommend 6 to 12 weeks of structured orientation for new graduate nurses before independent practice. On January 16, 2025, Henderson, 31 years old and a resident of Willoughby Hills, was arrested. She was arraigned by video at Bedford Municipal Court. The charge was involuntary manslaughter, a third-degree felony, along with 2 first-degree misdemeanors, tampering with records and gross patient neglect. Her bond was set at $2,500. On March 26, 2025, a Cuyahoga County grand jury returned a multi-count indictment. Henderson entered a not guilty plea before Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Deborah Turner on April 3, 2025. The case remains ongoing. A civil wrongful death action filed by Muetti's family in early 2025 names the facility and its operating entity as defendants. The civil suit alleges that the unsecured exit door and the facility's staffing and supervisory practices were proximate causes of Muetti's death, and it raises questions about whether the facility's ownership-level management bore responsibility for conditions that allowed the incident to occur. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Michael C. O'Malley has stated publicly that the case is being prosecuted to protect residents who are unable to protect themselves. Case 7. Tyler Heffron, a registered nurse. A hospital narcotics cabinet. A pattern of missing fentanyl identified before any patient harm was reported, and an investigation driven entirely by the hospital's own internal compliance systems. Kettering Health Maine is the flagship hospital of the Kettering Health System in Montgomery County, Ohio, located in the Dayton metro area. Tyler Heffron, 33 years old at the time of the events at issue, was a registered nurse employed at Kettering Health Maine. According to Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office Public Information Officer Greg Flanagan, nursing supervisors at the hospital became aware of patterns in narcotics dispensing records that were inconsistent with legitimate clinical assignments. The monitoring system that flagged the discrepancies was Kettering Health's automated controlled substance dispensing infrastructure, a system of electronic cabinets that records every withdrawal by employee identification, timestamp, and patient assignment. Hospitals use this data not only for real-time inventory management, but also for retrospective audit, comparing what was dispensed to what was documented as administered to specific patients. When the administered and dispensed figures diverge, a flag is generated in the pharmacy compliance queue. Kettering Health Police, the hospital system's sworn law enforcement agency, opened an investigation based on those flags. The investigation involved a review of Heffron's dispensing activity, his patient assignments, and the physical drug supplies in his assigned care area. According to the public information officer, investigators found evidence that Heffron had removed fentanyl from intravenous bags intended for patients and replaced the missing volume with saline. Investigators also recovered fentanyl from a locker belonging to Heffron on hospital premises. The distinction between fentanyl replacement diversion and simple theft is important from a legal and patient safety perspective. When a controlled substance is removed from a patient's intravenous bag and replaced with saline, the patient receives no analgesic benefit from the administered dose. Whether any of Heffron's patients experienced inadequate pain management as a result was not publicly detailed in the filed charges. A Montgomery County grand jury indicted Heffron on 3 counts: theft of drugs, tampering with drugs, and possession of a fentanyl-related compound. The tampering charge addressed the replacement of fentanyl with saline in patient intravenous bags. Heffron appeared before Montgomery County Common Pleas Judge Stephen K. Dankoff. His attorney filed a motion for intervention in lieu of conviction, an Ohio revised code mechanism available to certain nonviolent defendants whose criminal conduct is tied to substance use disorder. The court granted the motion. As part of the agreement, Heffron pleaded guilty to theft of drugs and possession of a fentanyl-related compound, with those pleas held in abeyance pending successful completion of a 1 to 5 year supervised rehabilitation program administered through Montgomery County Probation Services. Upon successful completion, the guilty pleas are dismissed, and no conviction is entered on the defendant's record. Failure to comply with the program's requirements results in the court proceeding to sentencing on the guilty pleas. A spokesperson for Kettering Health confirmed that Heffron was no longer employed by the system and stated that the hospital would maintain patient safety as its top operational priority. The Ohio Board of Nursing's online license verification system lists Heffron's nursing license status as inactive. The case illustrates several features of modern Ohio drug diversion enforcement that distinguish 21st century cases from those of prior decades. First, the detection came from the hospital's own internal systems, not from a patient complaint, a family member, or an external regulator. Second, the response was fast. Internal compliance, hospital police, and the county prosecutor's office worked in a coordinated sequence. Third, the disposition reflected the state's recognition that drug diversion is frequently tied to substance use disorder, and that treatment may better serve the public interest than incarceration in cases where no patient harm is documented. The case is one of several Dayton-area fentanyl diversion prosecutions that prompted Kettering Health and other Ohio health systems to upgrade their pharmacy analytics platforms in 2024 and 2025. Case 8, Nicolette Gilger 20 felony counts. 2 weeks, 1 automated dispensing audit. The Nicolette Del Gilger case out of Warren, Ohio, is a textbook example of how modern hospital pharmacy compliance systems can close the window on drug diversion with a speed and precision that would have been impossible 20 years ago. Nicolette Gilger, 35 years old, has held a registered nursing license in Ohio since 2019. At the time of the events at issue, she was employed at St. Joseph's Hospital in Warren, a member of the Mercy Health System in Trumbull County in northeast Ohio. Trumbull County is part of the greater Youngstown metropolitan area. According to the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office, the alleged diversions occurred during a span of approximately 2 weeks, from December 26, 2024, through January 10, 2025. The substance involved was fentanyl. The detection process followed the same general architecture as the Heffron case in Dayton. Mercy Health's internal pharmacy compliance team conducts routine audits of automated dispensing cabinet activity. Those audits compare the identity of the nurse who withdrew a controlled substance, the patient to whom the substance was documented as administered, the quantity dispensed, and the quantity remaining in the cabinet inventory. When the numbers in that chain of custody do not reconcile, a discrepancy report is generated. In the Gilger case, the discrepancy report reflected a pattern of fentanyl withdrawals that could not be accounted for by documented patient administration over the 2-week period at issue. The hospital reported the finding to law enforcement, as required by Federal Drug Enforcement Administration regulations governing controlled substance registrants. Those regulations require that any registrant, including a hospital, report the theft or significant loss of any controlled substance to the DEA within 1 business day of discovery, using DEA Form 106. The Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office presented the case to the grand jury. On a date in early 2025, the grand jury returned a 20-count indictment. The charges included 5 counts of possession of a fentanyl-related compound, with additional counts related to deception to obtain a dangerous drug and theft of drugs. Gilger was arrested on Friday, May 23, 2025. She was booked into the Trumbull County Jail and released on bond later the same day. Her arraignment in Trumbull County Common Pleas Court was scheduled for June 11, 2025. A spokesperson for Mercy Health issued a statement to WFMJ News, Warren's NBC affiliate, saying, "Mercy Health's highest priority is ensuring the safety of our patients, visitors, and staff. As a faith-based organization, we hold our associates to the highest level of ethical standards, in alignment with our core values." The spokesperson confirmed the former nurse was no longer employed by the system, and that Mercy Health would cooperate fully with law enforcement. No patients have been identified in public filings as having experienced harm attributable to the alleged diversions. The question of patient impact is a subject of ongoing legal proceedings. The Ohio Board of Nursing, the state agency responsible for disciplinary action against nursing licensees, confirmed that its proceedings in connection with any named nurse are confidential under Ohio Revised Code, Section 4723.28, subsection I, and that the board can neither confirm nor deny the existence of a complaint or investigation concerning any specific individual. Gilger's license status as of the date of this episode's publication was not publicly confirmed. The Gilger case is representative of a broader pattern in Ohio healthcare fraud enforcement. According to the Ohio Attorney General's Healthcare Fraud Section, Ohio's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit filed 892 indictments and obtained 898 convictions across all healthcare fraud categories in the 5-year period between 2021 and 2025. Drug diversion cases, which were once primarily identified through patient reports or accidental discovery, now generate most of their initial evidentiary leads through pharmacy analytics. The case remains pending. Case 9, Haley Bischoff, a delivery driver, a tampered box, a security camera review, and a registered nurse who, according to her own admission to investigators, used a stolen employee access card to enter a locked clinic after hours and intercept a controlled substance shipment. Haley Bischoff, 33 years old, held a registered nursing license in Ohio at the time of the events at issue. Her license is currently listed as inactive on the Ohio Board of Nursing's public verification system. She was employed as a nurse at the Northwest Ohio Ketamine Clinic, located on Central Avenue in Toledo, Lucas County, Ohio. The chain of events that led to her indictment began in September of 2025, when a staff member at the clinic discovered a delivery box outside an operating room. The box appeared to have been tampered with. The clinic's management contacted an agent of the Ohio Board of Pharmacy and initiated an internal review. Pharmacy board agents are authorized under Ohio law to investigate the unlawful acquisition, diversion, or misuse of controlled substances at licensed dispensing facilities. The Board of Pharmacy's Compliance and Drug Control Division oversees outpatient ketamine clinics, which are required to maintain controlled substance inventories under both state and federal law. In a clinic setting, where ketamine is classified as a Schedule III controlled substance under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, any discrepancy between ordered quantity, received quantity, and administered quantity must be documented and is subject to audit. The Board of Pharmacy agent who conducted the initial inquiry interviewed Bischoff. According to the Sylvania court document filed by the board, Bischoff admitted the following sequence of events. She had obtained another clinic employee's access card without that employee's permission. She had used the card to gain entry to the clinic after its normal operating hours. She had intercepted a United Parcel Service delivery of ketamine at the clinic's receiving area, accepting the package from the driver. She had opened the sealed delivery box and removed 5 vials of ketamine from it. She had then manipulated the box in an attempt to conceal the fact that it had been previously opened. The admission was comprehensive and detailed. The Board of Pharmacy's court filing described the account as arising from Bischoff's own statement during the compliance interview. A Lucas County grand jury returned an initial indictment in October of 2025, charging Bischoff with 3 counts of deception to obtain a dangerous drug. The primary offense applicable to a licensed healthcare professional who uses the trappings of their professional role to obtain a controlled substance to which they are not entitled. Bischoff entered a not guilty plea. Her attorney filed a motion for intervention in lieu of conviction, and she was referred to the Lucas County Adult Probation Department for evaluation under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2951.041. That section allows a court to divert certain defendants with substance use disorder into monitored treatment programs in lieu of prosecution, provided specific eligibility criteria are met. The case was assigned to Lucas County Common Pleas Judge Lindsay Navarre. On November 13, 2025, a second Lucas County grand jury returned a supplemental indictment charging Bischoff with theft of drugs and burglary. The burglary charge arose from the allegation that she had unlawfully entered a secured portion of the clinic, using the stolen access card for the purpose of committing the theft. As of mid-December of 2025, Bischoff had not entered pleas on the theft and burglary counts. The intervention in lieu of conviction motion filed on the original charges remained pending before Judge Navarre. The Northwest Ohio Ketamine Clinic had not issued public statements on the matter. The case prompted discussions within Ohio's outpatient ketamine clinic sector about after-hours access controls, 2-person controlled substance delivery verification requirements, and the adequacy of key card audit trails for after-hours access events. Outpatient ketamine clinics have expanded significantly in Ohio in the period since 2019, and this case is among the first criminal prosecutions to arise from a diversion at such a facility. The Ohio Board of Nursing's public statements on the case were limited to confirmation of Bischoff's current license status and a citation of the relevant statutory confidentiality provision. The case remains open. Case 10, Joseph Ratcliffe Real-Time Remote Video Monitoring, a registered nurse with no direct employment relationship with the hospital where the incident occurred, a patient with dementia who was entirely dependent on her caregivers, and an arrest made on the same day as the reported incident, because the evidence was captured live. The Christ Hospital is a 900-bed acute care hospital on Auburn Avenue in the Mount Auburn neighborhood of Cincinnati, Hamilton County, Ohio. It is a member of the Tri-Health system. Joseph Ratcliffe, 63 years old, was not directly employed by the Christ Hospital. He was assigned there as a contracted nurse through DaVita Kidney Care. According to the Kentucky Board of Nursing, Ratcliffe has held a registered nursing license in the Commonwealth of Kentucky since 1991. The incident at the center of this case occurred on January 23, 2026. According to the criminal complaint and the indictment returned by a Hamilton County grand jury on January 30, 2026, Ratcliffe entered the room of a female patient who was under care for a recent medical procedure. The patient had a documented diagnosis of dementia. Prosecutors allege that Ratcliffe engaged in sexual conduct with the patient at a time when her ability to resist or consent was impaired by her cognitive and medical condition. What makes this case procedurally distinctive is the mechanism of detection. The incident was observed in real time by a certified nursing assistant who was monitoring a remote intensive care unit camera system. That CNA immediately notified a supervising registered nurse on the remote ICU monitoring team, who in turn notified the remote ICU nursing manager. Hospital staff alerted the Cincinnati Police Department while Ratcliffe was still on the premises. Ratcliffe was taken into custody at the hospital on January 23, 2026, the same day as the alleged incident. On January 30, 2026, a Hamilton County grand jury returned a 2-count indictment charging Ratcliffe with 1 count of rape and 1 count of gross sexual imposition. He was held at the Hamilton County Justice Center on a $200,000 bond. The institutional responses were rapid across multiple parties. A spokesperson for the Christ Hospital Health Network issued a public statement on January 24, 2026, confirming that an individual not employed by the network had been taken into custody on the prior day after team members alerted law enforcement, and thanking both the responding team members and the Cincinnati Police Department. A spokesperson for DaVita Kidney Care acknowledged the arrest and confirmed that the individual was no longer deployed by DaVita. The Kentucky Board of Nursing imposed an emergency temporary suspension of Ratcliffe's nursing license, citing reasonable cause to believe he was unable to practice nursing with reasonable skill and safety. That suspension became effective immediately and prohibits Ratcliffe from practicing as a registered nurse or in any advanced practice nursing capacity anywhere in the Commonwealth of Kentucky during the pendency of any disciplinary proceedings. The Hamilton County case is ongoing. Ratcliffe has not entered a plea as of the most recent available court records. The case has generated significant attention within hospital systems across Ohio and nationally because of how the detection occurred. Remote intensive care unit monitoring, known as tele-ICU, has existed for more than 2 decades as a tool for monitoring deteriorating patients from centralized command centers. The technology allows a small team of critical care nurses, physicians, and support staff to provide real-time oversight for patients across dozens or hundreds of rooms simultaneously. In the Ratcliffe case, the same technology used to watch vital signs also produced a real-time record of alleged misconduct that no written policy or periodic room check could have generated. Hospital boards and patient safety committees in Ohio and nationwide have cited the case as a reason to review the placement, coverage, and staffing protocols of their tele-ICU camera systems, not only for deteriorating patient detection, but also as a safeguard against staff misconduct in rooms where patients are unable to advocate for themselves.